Hello, Dolphins fans, haters, and everyone in between to your favorite show, discussing the greatest franchise in sports, the Miami Dolphins. My name is Moose, your host, and today I'm super excited to get going as we take a look at some potential fits at the 3 first-round selection spots that the Dolphins hold in this coming draft on Thursday night. And as always, we'll also take a quick look at the latest stories published over at PhinsPod.com. Let's dive in.
Defense to try and run the ball on. Dolphins are going to have to stay patient.
Fitzpatrick on 2nd and 7, throwing a dart. It is complete. That's Preston Williams. 7-0 Jets. 2nd and 7 Miami from inside the Jet 40. Fitzpatrick puts some air under it. Far side. It is caught. Perfect placement as he finds Williams again.
The starting middle linebacker.
And not only that, calling plays for this defense today. Fitzpatrick just gets it out to the end zone. Wide open is Williams for the touchdown. Did not have a Jet defender anywhere around him.
So the Miami Dolphins are sort of in an unprecedented spot in their franchise. I'm a relatively young Dolphins fan, and I think most people, even if you're an older Dolphins fan, can recognize that it's been a long time since this franchise has been put in a spot of potential winning on a consistent basis. They've had, their flashes, 2016, 2008, and, sometimes in between with Ryan Tannehill where, you would feel like the team was ready to turn the corner back in sort of 2014 and, when they made those big splashes in free agency. But deep down, and I think the rest of the league knew, other front offices were aware, the Dolphins weren't really going to be competing year in, year out because they were sort of putting Band-Aids on much deeper issues, which we now know to be the offensive line and potentially, more importantly, quarterback. So overall, we're going to take a look at the first round of this draft. I'm super excited because Miami holds 3 spots, 3 selections. So what that means for the Dolphins is they are in an opportunity to potentially change the outcome of their franchise for the next 5 to 10 years. If the pick's made at 5, 18, 26, or at any other number, frankly, and we'll get into some of those possibilities, if they hit on all 3 of those guys, or even 2 of them, or one of them is just a franchise transcending player, I think the Dolphins are in it for the long haul and start building a winner on a consistent basis, which was the main reason that Brian Flores was brought in here and Chris Greer was promoted, because they wanted to build something from the ground up. So moving right along to the 5th overall selection where the Dolphins pick in the first round, my first choice, I'm going to list just a few players that I think would be great fits at those specific spots and sort of a quick reasoning why I think that way. So for number 1, it's Tua Tagovailoa. We don't really have to get into it too much. Everyone's talked about it ad nauseum, but I just think there's a lot of misinformation going around about why it should be a fit. Yes, the injury concern is real. I totally understand that. But at the end of the day, if you take a safer quarterback from a health perspective whose talent isn't there, him being available to you, what benefit is that really? I mean, Ryan Tannehill was, before his knees went down, was by far one of the most reliable and available quarterbacks around. That didn't do much for the franchise. So the only way you're really going to make an impact is if you get that hit or miss player. I mean, Andrew Luck faced a lot of injuries in his career, and they only had him for 8 years, or 7 or 8 years, if I'm correct. And would you ask a Colts fan if that wasn't worth it? I mean, maybe they wish they took someone else, but frankly, they probably wish they took Russell Wilson in 2012. But honestly, having Andrew Luck play at that elite level, for that team, elevated them as a franchise. And it's unfortunate he walked away for his own reasons, of course, and he's probably and hopefully happy for that. But, a great talent walked away from a team. So at the end of the day, injury concerns are real, but getting that transcendent talent is by far the most important, asset to a football team. And you can't look at Justin Herbert and Tua Tagovailoa. Take a real honest look at the way they played, not the way they look, not even stats, even though stats aren't even comparable, just with the eye test. If you swapped those quarterbacks, yes, Alabama would still steamroll, and Justin Herbert, would probably be in a similar position. But I think Oregon would have been elevated at a far higher level. To his play, just his style of play naturally elevates because he's a distributor. He's a classic point guard style quarterback, but he can also make some plays and he takes shots. He's not full-on Chad Pennington, but he's going to make those types of decisions, and he's able to kind of stretch the field a little bit more and take smart, calculated risks. So that's why he's number 1, and that's easy. My second, if something goes wrong and quarterback is not taken or for whatever reason that's not in the plans, there are some great prospects around that 5 spot. Obviously, when you're going into a draft looking for a quarterback, the entire fan base and sort of the narrative around the pick becomes a quarterback, understandably. But there are so many teams that envy where Miami picks because of the assets that we could potentially add. And number 2 is absolutely one of those. That's Isaiah Simmons, linebacker out of Clemson. Frankly, I don't know if he's a linebacker or a safety, but in this Brian Flores defense, he would be a perfect fit. Why? Because the defense already plays in a positionless style where, they don't have necessarily traditional roles assigned. Obviously you have a certain amount of corners, certain amount of safeties, and a certain amount of linebackers, but where they are positioned on the field is dependent on the matchups that the offense is presenting. And that changes week to week within the game. And we saw Flores kind of hit a stride with that as the defense got a lot better as the season went along without pretty much any talent, unfortunately, as we saw from the purge and the purge of the roster and the signing of a bunch of important defensive players, and you'll see a few get added in the draft as well. So I think Simmons could be plugged and played and essentially take away the best non-receiver. I mean, some receivers he could match up with, but take the best option away from the opposing offense, and that changes the look of a defense. And he's very young. I believe he's 21, 22 years old, maybe 23, but he's very young and still growing. So it's something where you're potentially getting a physical freak for a long time who's going to make a big impact and sort of be a staple of a defense for a while, a defense that's on the up and up. And sort of on a similar lens, the third player I'd probably be okay with taking at 5 would be Jeff Okuda. The reason for that is similar to Denzel Ward. He's one of those can't miss prospects, and that's mainly just because of his footwork. He's insane. He's got long arms. He's around the ball. He makes smart decisions when attempting to make an interception or make a play, but he's always in position, and his footwork goes to show for that, and his natural athleticism. Also, the kid is awesome. I don't know if any of you have read the Players Tribune he wrote pertaining to his mother who passed away as he was entering his freshman year of college, and obviously it definitely made me more biased, made me like the guy, but he the talent on the field backs that up, and I think he would elevate the secondary to another level in terms of not only we're already in a good spot, we already have 2 elite level corners, but he would allow, from a matchup perspective, he would allow the Dolphins defense to do so much, moving Xavier around, moving Byron Jones around, maybe kick one of them into the nickel, maybe let one of them roam, play some safety, Xavier back there, sort of ball hawking. So it just lets you be more versatile and diverse with your defensive look. So Okuda, I think, would be a great fit. And again, frankly, we don't know Xavier's future. One, just from a health perspective, he does struggle to stay healthy. Ideally that's not a problem going forward, but he's also had some off-field incidents, which hopefully aren't a major deal, and it doesn't prevent him from one, being a productive citizen, as well as also being a productive football player, from our perspective being more important. So we want Xavier around, but having Okuda would not only be a boon to the defense overall, but a potential, even in case Byron Jones goes down, it would just be nice to have someone step in, and the drop-off wouldn't go from really good to kind of mediocre. It could go from really good to still pretty good. So that would help in the long term with the season because there are injuries. My 4th player is more the makes sense, smart approach, and that would be Andrew Thomas, tackle out of Georgia. He's physically already there. Mekhi Becton is raw, and a lot of these players are sort of raw or better run blockers. Tristan Wirfs specifically, but I just think with Andrew Thomas, you're getting a plug-and-play player, a guy who's going to be really good for you and good right away. And, if you believe in your coaching, which this coaching staff probably does, led by Brian Flores and sort of the job they did going down the stretch last year, then, these types of players develop, and if they don't hit their highest ceiling of potential, they definitely can improve over time. And he's already, someone who can, handle themselves at the NFL level. And then on top of that, Jedrick Wills, Alabama's right tackle. He, I think, similarly would be able to be a plug-and-play option in terms of, the offensive line, which it's not really that hard considering right now there's nobody on that offensive line. I mean, we did make that signing with Ted Karras and Eric Flowers, but Karras, there's a reason New England let him go. If he was anything of repute or something that they didn't think they could replace, I believe you would have seen Bill offering something more than a 1-year, $4 million deal. Definitely a good, depth piece and someone who already knows sort of the program and can help lead potentially younger guys kind of fall in line to that program, sort of replacing the Daniel Kilgore role of last year. But, in terms of how solid that offensive front is, we need protection. One of these 3 picks has to be an offensive lineman, and that's why at 5, if things go wrong, we can't get the quarterback, and a defensive playmaker might not be in the cards, then I would be absolutely fine with taking one of these tackles, just to shore up the team. Wouldn't be fine, but it'd be at least a smart move and not a random linebacker or something that isn't as versatile, or a potential running back or something. So it definitely is a better move and a smarter move, building from the inside out. And speaking from inside out, the last player, and honestly, now that I'm going to talk about him, maybe higher, but Derrick Brown, Auburn's defensive tackle. He's a physical freak. He's someone who, Christian Wilkins is an excellent player in his own right, and he hopefully develops into being a staple and a stud of this defense, even though last year he kind of played like one towards the end. If you let him share reps with Derrick Brown, and you have Devon Godshaw in there, and sort of the players that Miami was able to bring in and get some production out of, in the rotation, those sort of 3rd or 4th defensive tackles in the depth chart. But if you add Derrick Brown, not only are you pretty much, you can't run on this defensive front, that would be definitely a big addition there, but he's also able to rush the passer, similar to some comps to Ndamukong Suh in terms of just being a dominant freak, but in terms, he's still, not completely, he hasn't gotten all the strength at this point, and there's still time for him to grow and develop. But the framework and sort of what he produced at Auburn, and just the way he plays, so physical and violent and hard, I do think that he would be a great addition to the defense. And it might not be boring, it ain't sexy going defensive tackle 2 years in a row, but that's better off than potentially taking a quarterback that you're tying yourself to for a long time. But we'll see how it all transpires. All right, now moving on to the second selection that the Dolphins have in the 2020 NFL Draft, and that's at the 18th overall pick. And although there's a lot of chatter that the Dolphins might be making a move up from 18, and we'll get into that later on in the podcast. If they do stand pat here, or potentially even move back, there are some good players that they can get. Unfortunately, it's kind of a dead zone pertaining to the types of players that Miami would want to target. Ideally, you would take that offensive lineman here, a potential defensive playmaker, or potentially elite defensive playmaker, but those options kind of dry up because, again, it's so top heavy at a lot of positions. But there are some things left. So I would say, if a Tristan Wirfs or Mekhi Becton, those 2 offensive linemen, like I said, fall, absolutely snag them up. They most likely will not be there. Xavier Mckinney, the safety out of Alabama, yes, it would feel like swapping one Alabama safety for another, but he would be a great fit in this Dolphins defense under Brian Flores. There's actually an article up at PhinsPod.com sort of discussing the type of safety that Miami and Brian Flores would be looking for. So feel free to go over and check that out. It's a pretty good read. But pertaining to McKinney's play style, compared to Tua, a lot of Alabama players going on these days, compared to Minkah, Xavier McKinney is a far more physical player. He's not as good in coverage. He's not as intelligent in terms of how he, from a football perspective. That's what Minkah's specialty was. He would study. He would know an offense inside and out when he would face him, and a lot of the plays he made was because he understood what the offense was trying to do to him, and he responded, fast. And he was also an incredible athlete. Xavier McKinney, though, he is a force. He hits harder than any other safety in this draft class, arguably, and he played at the highest level, playing against some of the best teams and some receivers who are going to be taken very, very high in this draft. And frankly, 2 receivers he would face every day in practice. And so, he comes up and is able to help in the running game. He's also, he handles his own at coverage. And if you bring a guy like him in, you play him at strong safety, potentially, then, you can move Bobby McCain back to the free safety spot, mix Eric Rowe in there, because he just knows the defense so well. But Xavier McKinney at 18, that would be a great pick, just to help bolster this defense. And they've done a lot of work sort of on that front end, on the interior defensive line, defensive end position with Emmanuel Ogbah, and Shaq Lawson from Buffalo. But, he would help secure the back end with Byron Jones, and Xavier Howard. So that would be a great pick. Then sort of moving back up the front, on the defensive front, there's a couple players. AJ Epinesa, he's really good for Miami's defense in terms of defensive end position, and specifically being able to stop the run by setting an edge and playing strong at the point of attack. But sort of when a defense is in a pass, they have to throw the ball, and ideally, the way the Dolphins play defense and are shifting sort of in that New England realm, you want to play from the lead and you want to make the offense more predictive. So, he can also put his hand in the dirt and go, get to the quarterback. So that's absolutely something in A.J. Epinez's game. He's a really good athlete, and he was very productive at Iowa. And then the final player at 18 that I would love to see the Dolphins take would be Javon Kinlaw. He's one of those raw defensive tackles, but compared to a Derrick Brown, he's far more athletic in terms of speed, in terms of being able to pass rush. So, there's definitely something to work with there. Derrick Brown's a more dominant player, and he can just bully you to the quarterback. And, although that is incredible, it's not as sustainable as getting a more so quick, twitchy, explosive, technique-driven guy, even though, Javon Kinlaw is raw right now. But if you get a guy like him, throw him in the interior defensive line, which already has some depth, it would allow him to sort of develop in the rotation and sort of complement, Christian Wilkins very well going forward. So that's sort of my, thoughts at 18. There are a lot of ways that the team could go, as you saw, offensive line, linebacker, sort of outside linebacker, defensive end position, as well as safeties. All right, and the final spot is the 26th overall selection. So this is really where it gets interesting because now we're at a point where these elite level, guaranteed potential nothing's guaranteed, but the guys you think will blossom into Pro Bowlers, they're all gone now. So a lot of these players do turn into Pro Bowlers, and you kind of project them in that way. And some players do fall, but usually this is where you're going to take the end of the first round is the guy who is more raw. And there's some of those players, or if they're not raw, there's sort of a ceiling to how good they can be because, again, those blue chip players are gone. So we're going to touch on a couple of them. My personal favorite fit would be Zack Bond. He's a defensive end outside linebacker out of Wisconsin. I know the Dolphins have kind of a Wisconsin kick these days, but there's something about Wisconsin front seven defenders. They're very physical. They're strong. The way they play defense, it's much more aligned to the way the Dolphins do. And he's kind of like a Kyle Van Noy, honestly, but just with more physical tools. So he's someone who could come in, not necessarily need to start right away, but you could easily develop him into a very formidable weapon. And again, he's someone who can put his hand into the dirt and rush the passer, which is a great asset to have. But if you need him to go cover a running back out of the flat, pick up a tight end, just drop back in zone, it's something he can still do, and he was asked to do at Wisconsin. Not nearly as twitchy, not as fast, not as tall and lanky as you would want sort of at that position. He is more of a small, sturdy guy, very strong, and definitely can hold his own at the point of attack, which is, again, super important in this defense. But, that's why he wouldn't necessarily be taken earlier. Another team absolutely could have fallen in love with him, but he's more of a scheme fit type player. There are teams, wide nine type defenses that just would not work with Zack Bond's game. But I think he'd be a great fit at 26. And you'll start sort of seeing a theme here with what I think the Dolphins should do at 26. It's all defense. So the reason for that is because I think they should be investing early on in those premier, pivotal offensive positions, quarterback and sort of left tackle, right tackle. Just you need to bolster the offense because you did help the defense. But when you're at 26, the value for the Dolphins would be on the defensive front, in my opinion, unless, of course, a Jerry Jeudy, a CeeDee Lamb, potentially a Henry Ruggs falls. And then Yetur Gross-Matos, sorry for butchering that. But yeah, he's a pass rusher from Penn State. Again, lanky, fast, explosive off the edge, someone who would just add to the Dolphins' pass rush. And although they did add some pieces, again, Shaq Lawson, Emmanuel Ogbah, Kyle Van Noy, more from that linebacker spot, but they still need that guy who the quarterback's going to keep an eye on. Right now, the pass rush is from blitzes. It's schemed up. If there was someone who, regardless of scheme, was a threat on any play, and then you can cater your calls to that guy, that's what you need, and that's what Miami had for a while with Cam Wake, and they sort of squandered it, and that's what they had before with Jason Taylor. So having sort of that premier pass rusher is something that would be great for this franchise. And then lastly is a fan favorite, Antoine Winfield Jr. Not only is his father, Brian Flores, his favorite player in the NFL, as he said at the Combine, Antoine Winfield Jr. would sort of do the things that Xavier McKinney can't do while also doing some of the things that Xavier McKinney can do. The reason I would sort of drop him at 26, and while I would be okay with taking McKinney at 8, is just because Antoine Winfield Jr. is kind of a small guy, 5'9". Durability as a safety in the NFL is already a concern, and these are when you got your 6'2", 6'3", super strong and athletic Derwin James types out there, and even he went down. So there's just something with his 5'9" frame that makes me a little uncomfortable. He's a thick guy. He's not skinny by any means. But again, just not something I would necessarily want to invest in 18. Just because he was initially a second round prospect, but I just think the fit with Miami and how good of a player he is, 26 would be absolutely acceptable to take a guy like him. He would play the free safety rather than Xavier McKinney's strong safety position. He is a sound tackler, but what he provides that McKinney can't is sort of that coverage aspect. He's not as dynamic as McKinney, and his ceiling is a lot lower, which is the reason that I do think McKinney was a better fit for Miami, because we have time to develop. Right now the Dolphins aren't expected to be in the playoffs and the Super Bowl next year. Although, personally, I think they have a good shot at the playoffs, and I think a lot of fans and I think people will start thinking that way from the national perspective as well. They have time to develop. So right now, take your swings because you can recover from a miss in free agency and sort of finding another piece versus sort of getting a guy who is good, but then when you start hitting your stride as a franchise, there's a ceiling there. And as always, we like to take a look at what was published over at PhinsPod.com this week. So the first article that was released was referencing the roster cuts that the Dolphins made. It's always sad to sort of see players lose their jobs, even ones that you didn't really know or had no connection to or saw really make plays on the field. But again, it's nothing necessarily to celebrate unless they're really, really bad. But these are just young guys trying to make it in the league. And a few of them have actually been picked up. So that does show that Miami's bringing in good talent at the very least. So, some of these players were receivers, Andy Jones, Terry Wright, a couple linebackers as well, and Jake Carlock and Jamal Davis. The more noticeable names might be to some Dolphins fans is defensive tackle Gerald Willis. He's a University of Miami alum. Again, because of the direction Miami's going, already kind of having some depth at that position, and also most likely drafting another defensive or interior defensive lineman in the draft. There probably won't be room on the roster, so just sort of getting ahead of that. And then cornerback Lyndon Stephens. Similarly, there's a lot of competition at that position, and Miami's probably going to bring in a more mid-tier pick, someone they want to work with more long-term. But Lyndon Stephens was picked up, so that is great news. He was picked up off waivers, as was Gerald Willis. So those players are still getting a shot in the league, and good luck to them. The Fins also reportedly asked about Leonard Fournette, and so that's the other article over at the site. Again, you can sort of get more in depth with these topics at PhinsPod.com. But a lot of people are against the idea of bringing Leonard Fournette in, and we sort of discuss it in the article. But I think it'd be a great fit. I think, again, like I said, Miami's in a unique spot compared to a lot of other franchises. There's not this pressure that a Matt Patricia has to win right now, a Bill O'Brien to win right now. Brian Flores has kind of earned the right to, he's not going to chill, but he can sort of build something. So, if the Dolphins are 4-6 at the start of next year, as long as they don't look absolutely horrible, 4-6, all right. I mean, okay. I expect more. I'm still going to want more. But in terms of, will Brian Flores get fired week 7? That's just not happening. So, bringing a guy like Leonard Fournette, what do you have to lose? You have nothing to lose. Ideally, it works out well, and then you can potentially sign him to a good deal, which you're happy about. Maybe he performs far better than Jordan Howard, and I mean he was, and he early in his career prior to some of the injuries, and he's just such a powerful runner, and he would immediately help any young back you bring in too, and it would help a young quarterback. So it would be cheap, a mid-round pick. You toss him their way because the Jaguars know they're not getting much compensation, just because for some reason that franchise with Yannick Ngakoue and Jalen Ramsey and now Leonard Fournette do a horrible job of keeping their business in-house. So the market's driven down, and for that reason, hey, shoot over a 4th-round pick, 3rd-round pick, maybe exchange a player or two who's sort of potentially lower on the roster, and you get a Leonard Fournette. Because yes, if he does really great and you don't want to sign him to a big deal, another team will, because he's Leonard Fournette, the 4th overall pick in the NFL draft. If another team signs him to a big deal, you get a comp pick, so you're going to get what you gave up. So getting a guy like Fournette would be smart in my opinion. He's a pass catching option, not dynamic in any means, but he adds an element to the offense that frankly this team did not have last year at all. In fact, franchise worst running team. So Fournette, I don't think the Dolphins are in any position to scoff at running back talent in terms of where they get it from. And Leonard Fournette again was a top 5 pick just a couple of years ago, and it's not like he was busting in Jacksonville. He had Blake Bortles as his quarterback, so you can't ask too much. And then we also talked about the best draft prospects, specifically at safety, so feel free to go to the website to check that out. We touch on Xavier McKinney and Antoine Winfield and sort of dive into that, so if you're interested on that, check that out. And then the last would be, are the Dolphins eyeing a trade up? So we did touch on this earlier in the show, but in terms of what the Dolphins are doing at that 18 spot, Omar Kelly of the South Florida Sun-Sentinel reported that he's been hearing that the Dolphins are calling around, asking teams, gauging interest of moving up from 18. This makes all the sense in the world, because that means the Dolphins are likely taking a quarterback at 5. They're not going to move, although a lot of people are pointing to, taking another player and then moving up to take Jordan Love. I just feel like the Dolphins, the talent discrepancy between a Jordan Love and Tua, or even Justin Herbert and Jordan Love, in my opinion, it's not worth moving up for, and Herbert's not going to last that long. And unless Miami expects to jump into the top 10 from 18, don't expect that to be the reasoning. It's probably to go up and get one of those players who they know can help them right away, and that position is either interior defensive line, which I don't believe they would move up for that position unless Derrick Brown fell a lot, but even then this team wouldn't move up and give up assets to acquire something like that. It would be for an offensive lineman, specifically one of those top 4 tackles that we talked about earlier. And the only reason you would invest and give up assets on that position is when you feel like you got your quarterback. So I just think it makes sense. And in 3-4 days, when everyone's sort of talking about how, oh my God, the Dolphins, look what they did. They filled all these holes. But right now they're acting as if they're going to go in all these other directions. I just don't see it. And I think it's very obvious that there's been a lot of misinformation spread around from weeks where everyone believed the Dolphins were going to absolutely trade up for Tua. Then the narrative shifting that, actually they're not going to move up. They like him, but they're not going to move up, to all of a sudden it going to, hey, they love Justin Herbert, to now, we don't know about Justin Herbert. They actually kind of love you. So it's just so much misinformation that we don't actually know. But what we do know is that talent wins out, and Tua Tagovailoa has more talent than arguably any other quarterback in this draft class. That includes Joe Burrow. He had an incredible 1 year, but Tua did it year in, year out. And aside from the injury concern, you're getting someone who can play at a high, high level. And frankly, we haven't seen that in South Beach. So that'll do it for us here today. Thank you so much for tuning into this pre-draft edition of the PhinsPod, and I hope you really enjoyed it and want to join us next time. Please subscribe to the show. It's now fully available on all platforms, which we're very excited about: Spotify, Apple Music, Google Play, and then we also upload this to YouTube as well. Feel free to continue the conversation over on Twitter and Instagram at PhinsPod. That's where the social media is most active usually. And then check out the site, PhinsPod.com, for daily news and content. Anything going on in the world of the Dolphins, it'll be talked about there. So I do hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Thank you for listening, and stay safe.